to More Sewing with Michele. This week, I'm going to talk about something that's really important to me, and I'm titling it, Let It Rip. So Let It Rip, we're going to be talking about seam rippers. Now, a seam ripper is an essential tool to every type of sewer that we have out there. It should be your best friend. It allows you to go in reverse and undo mistakes, and also to create a nice clean slate so that you can re-sew that area again. So it's something that we should embrace. We all make mistakes. Believe me, I make a ton of them, which is why I am so fond of my seam rippers, and I have lots of them. I have different seam rippers for different jobs. Sometimes it may just be how I feel during that day, but I have favorites and I use them, and I know where my seam rippers are all the time. I have one by my machine, and then I also have them in my special spot in my desk where I keep them. Now keep in mind, we all got probably that little itty bitty seam ripper when we bought our machines, or when we got our machines from a donation, or wherever you got your machines. But if you're still using that little itty bitty seam ripper, believe me, your life is going to be turned upside down, because those are not quality tools. Those are tools that are included with the machine. They'll get the job done, but they're not going to be the best for going fast, efficiently, and ripping out those seams. And I'm just going to tell you, when you see the 5 that I have today, I think you're going to invest. So don't forget to go to mores-sew.com at the end and click on the link so that you can purchase one of these great 5 seam rippers that I have for you today. Now, like I said, seam rippers should be your favorite tool. It should be just like your favorite scissors. It should be that go-to thing that you don't get frustrated. I can't tell you how many times my friends, or if I've been in an event, when I'm sewing in a community setting, where you hear someone get just so angry and frustrated because they sewed something incorrectly. And I've seen people get really upset. But the thing is, it happens to all of us. I can't, I'm not a huge, just so you know, it's a little secret here, I don't like to read the instructions so much a lot of the times. So I'll just sew something, and I can't tell you, I was working on a quilt recently, and I'd sew something together, and then I'd look at it and I'd go, that's not the way that's supposed to look. Grab my seam ripper, which I do call Jack the Ripper, because he's a seam ripper. But I'll grab Jack and I'll rip things out, and it's okay. It's okay. You just rip it out and you move on. So I want to get rid of the stigma and the bad juju associated with seam rippers. They're an essential tool. They should be valued. We want to embrace our seam rippers, get to know them, understand how to use them, because I bet you anything, most of you aren't really sure how to use your fork seam ripper correctly. And I'm going to show you that today. We've got a lot to talk about. So let's dive right in to Let It Rip on More Sewing with Michele. Okay, so let's talk about seam rippers. Basically, there's 2 types that they make. We have the fork head, and we have a surgical blade. So I'm going to hold these up really close. So 2 different types, surgical blade and the fork head. So with these 2 seam rippers, pretty much so encompasses all the different types out there. Now, seam rippers need to be sharp. If you have, this one, remember I talked about the little itty bitty one? I've got 3 of them here to show you. So these are 3 that I think came with my sewing machines. This one, look at that. It's even got the cleaning brushes. Never been used. You know why? Because I never used this seam ripper. To me, it's too little. It's hard to hold and handle. And I like a quality tool when I do my seam ripping. Now this one, even look at it. It's just so dinky. They're practical. They come with the machine. They will work. It's not a fact that they won't pull out your seams. There's just better ways of doing it. But one of the big things that you want to be aware of is you want your seam ripper to be sharp. You know, you wouldn't go try to cut up your fresh salmon with a really old, dull knife. No, you would use a sharp knife to get that salmon fillets out. Same thing with scissors. That's why seam rippers are so important. Like I said, we all make mistakes. It's going to happen. You never know. I was sewing early this morning and I had to use Jack the Ripper, my seam ripper. So it happens and I don't get frustrated. I will admit there's times where I get a little bit like, really? But it's okay. And the reason why is because we have quality tools to help us fix our problems. And that's the awesome part about a seam ripper. Now keep in mind, they are a consumable. Consumable meaning that if you have a seam ripper and it outlasts your favorite pair of jeans, it's probably time to get a new one. They're made to replace. There's always new technology and you get better, more convenient. I know when I've aged, using something this small is just difficult. So if I have a larger seam ripper to use and to grip and handle for ergonomics, if you have carpal tunnel, if you have other special needs and requirements, it's just better to have something that's more geared to your needs. And believe me, there are all different types of seam rippers out there, and a lot of them have very special and unique qualities to them. I'm going to show you my five favorites, but we'll get to that in a little bit. One thing that you should always make sure of is that you do have a cap for your seam ripper. One of the reasons they can get dull is if the cap is left off. And I know I was guilty of it when I was younger, before I became a serious sewer in my youth, where I lost my cap on my seam ripper and I didn't care. I just stuck it wherever. But what that does, it potentially can cause this blade to dull. So you want to make sure that you protect your seam ripper and put that cap back on. And make sure if it does fall off, retrieve it from the garbage can, pull it out from under your sewing cabinet, whatever it takes. Another reason that it's really important to keep your seam ripper capped is if you have small children or even an animal. I know my cat, she would love to play with something like this. She plays with pencils or anything that looks like a stick, and you don't want them to bite into that, or if it's a child, to step on it. If it's a child, to pick it up and start poking themselves. They could cause themselves a wound and a little bit of damage. So keep your seam ripper protected, keep the cap on, protect your animals, your children, and yourself. And in my opinion, like I said, your seam ripper needs to be changed. It shouldn't last longer than your favorite pair of jeans. And let me go into a demo and show you exactly how seam rippers are supposed to work. Okay, so here is a piece of fabric, just some scraps that I have together, and I want to show you exactly how these forked seam rippers are supposed to work. So what I like to do is I will do what most people do. I will pick out a few stitches at the start. And keep in mind, when I do my sewing, I'm generally at a very small stitch because I'm quilting. Now, do you see the tip here? How it has this red dot on one side? Let me lay it so make sure that you guys can see. So it has two pieces to the fork area. I'll hold it up real close. Okay, so it has the red ball part and then the fork part that's sharp. Now what you're going to want to do then is I basically take the fork part, I put it into my fabric here, and then I just pull it along. And do you hear that? Do you hear how it rips it out? This is how your tool is supposed to be used. Just like that. Super fast, super easy. Let me do it again so that you get it one more time. So once again, I always pick out a few of the stitches at the start, and then I kind of gently, depending upon what fabric you have, I gently pull it apart, take the ball part, add it on one side of the seams, and on the other side, I just simply pull it through. Now you want to make sure that your blade is flush with the fabrics, and just like that, done. Seconds. It takes seconds, ladies. How many people are guilty of sitting there with your seam ripper and picking out stitch by stitch? And I used to, before I started seam ripping this way, I would go, I don't know, every 10th stitch, 5th stitch. Sometimes you'll pull and you'll pull here and then you'll retrieve it this way. There's probably just as many ways to rip your seams out as there are people. There's lots of different ways of doing it. I've seen people pick literally stitch by stitch this way. It's too time consuming. Once again, I'm going to show you. Let me get one where I can show you the stitches. Here's another piece. Luckily, I always have lots of scraps. Start once again, rip some of the stitches out at the end, give it a nice little pull, and then I put that ball, and let me get closer so you can see. Woo! Put that ball on one side and the fork on the other, and you simply pull. And you can hear it rip. Voila! Super fast, super easy, and convenient. But keep in mind, you need a sharp seam ripper to do the job. And that's the way these forked seam rippers are supposed to be used. Now let me talk about the seam rippers that I have for you today, that I want to talk about their special needs and usages and why I love them. Okay, so I've been telling you about these 5 seam rippers that I've got for you today. You can either click on the link and go to the description for more Sewing with Michele, or you can go to our website, moors-sew.com, and then you can click on the More Sewing with Michele link to get to it. Either way works, but we want you to go check these out. So the first one that I want to show you is pretty cool and unique. And this is the Fiskars, and it's a tabletop seam ripper. Who knew? So the way that it works is you put it on your tabletop, and it's got this little thing, and it sections down. With that, it has the blade here, and then you can simply go ahead and rip your seams that way. So if you have special needs, this is going to be a great tool, because what does it do? It allows you to have 2 fingers free, and it does come with the cap, which I always say is really important. So once again, this is the Fiskars tabletop seam ripper. I love it. I love that it sections to the table, and it allows you to really have more control with both hands when you're doing your seam ripper. So once again, the Fiskars tabletop seam ripper. That's our first one today. Now the next one that I want to talk about is our Seamfix, and this is a dual seam ripper. So it has 2 blades. It's got a small one, and it also has a large one. So you'll see that they have both of them there. It has, once again, those red dots, but you're getting 2 seam rippers at one. And one of the things I love about this one is the ergonomic. Remember I said those little itty bitty short ones, they're problematic. They're hard to hold. This is a very large ergonomic. It's shaped so it's convenient and easy to hold. Love that. And also it has a special tool at the end. On the end of each side of the caps, it has this little rubber gripper. And the thing that does, you roll it across your seam ripping that you just did, and it pulls those threads out. Cool. So this is actually 3 tools in one. You've got 2 seam rippers, and you also have a thread remover after you do your seam ripping. So I love this. This is the Seamfix seam ripper. And it has the fork blade. So let me go into some of the other unique ones. Now I talked about the surgical blades. This is a surgical blade seam ripper. And with that, It's got one of those really, really sharp, I could probably cut down wheat with this blade. And with that, this one is really cool because it retracts into the container. So when you're done, you simply store it away and you're not going to lose the cap on this one. One of the other features that it does is it will lock into place. Did you hear that? You can pull it back and watch as you put it up, you lock it into place. And that way when you're doing your seam ripping, it's convenient and it's not going to go back into the container. It's very lightweight. It has a nice grip to it. And what I like about surgical seam rippers is that when I'm doing embroidery, and then sometimes when you're doing machine embroidery, there's just a ton of stitches and it's very difficult to remove those stitches. And that's when I like my surgical seam rippers, because that super sharp blade is going to get into those very teeny tiny multiple stitches in one area, and it's going to remove them a lot more efficiently than if you were using one of the fork seam rippers. So surgical seam ripper, this is the retractable, woo, I just made up a new word, retractable seam ripper. Now the next one that I want to show you is made by Kai. Now this one's got another little different situation to it, and it also has a protection. It's got like teeth. So on a regular surgical seam ripper, there is no way that I would run my fingers across it. But it's got these teeth that protect the blade. So it's safe to use around your children. They're not going to come and slice their finger open with this one. And this one, you simply glide it around. It's nice and convenient. It's got this special little grippy area here. And I love it because it's convenient to hold. It's ergonomic. It protects the blade, but it's also going to go right through your stitches like butter and cut them off. So love that. And once again, all of my seam rippers here today will have a cap. So this is the Kai seam ripper. Now the last seam ripper I was really excited about because it encompasses lots of different things. This is the lighted seam ripper. So it's got a cap. Once again, it's forked, but look at that. It can go lots of different areas. And the other thing that I want to show you is it has magnification. So I'm able to get up really close to my stitches. But wait, there's even more. It's lighted. So let me turn it on. So that way you can actually illuminate what you're going to seam rip. Who knew? So this is really super cool. So not only is the light LED, so it's super bright, the battery's going to last you for a long, long time, but it pivots so you can get to different areas. If you have, say, if you were doing cross stitch and you had something where, you know, you had to kind of contort your body, this way the seam ripper will contort for you so that your hand can stay fixed, and it also pivots. So this is like the Cadillac of seam rippers, lighted, magnified, and pivots. It's got the forked edge, super sharp, love it. And let me put the cap on before I cut myself, because that would be something that I would do. So love this. This is the lighted seam ripper. And once again, all of these 5 seam rippers you're going to be able to get at my landing page for more Sewing with Michele. And isn't that cool? 5 of them. So lots of options. So I know that I probably haven't changed many opinions as far as when you have to use that seam ripper, that it's kind of a bummer. But I want you to understand that having an essential tool to rip out those seams when you do make a mistake or something is misplaced and you need to fix it, it's so much better to have a tool that is made for the job, that is essential, that is a quality tool, something that's going to make your job easier, more efficient, not going to cause you strain or discomfort when you're using it. And also, you want to make sure that the amount of time you put into it, it doesn't need to be an all-day event. It can take just a couple minutes. And as you saw in the video that I demoed, that seam ripping was like that. And that's what we want it to be. You want it to be a blip in your sewing. You don't want to remember at the end of the day how you had to rip out a bunch of things. You want to remember at the end of the day the fun that you had creating something. So let's take that bad juju away. Let's celebrate our seam rippers for what they are, an essential tool. A tool that you need to make your sewing good, and it doesn't, like I said before, it doesn't matter what type of sewing you do, if it's machine embroidery, if you're making clothing, curtains, if you're quilting, a seam ripper is going to be an essential part of your tools that you need in your toolbox to get the job done. I hope you've enjoyed this week of More Sewing with Michele. I've totally enjoyed having you visit with me for about 20 minutes. Don't forget, once again, to click on the link in the description where you can pick up one of these 5 amazing seam rippers, or you can always go to mores-sew.com and click on my link there. I hope you have a fabulous day. I hope the next time you're sewing, you don't have to use a seam ripper at all. And until next week at More Sewing with Michele, have a fabulous day. Bye-bye.